Bennett. I am co-chair of the Instruction Committee for ACRL's Distance Learning section. On behalf of the committee, I just want to say thanks to everybody who's a member of that committee who's helped organize today's webinar. So on behalf of the committee, I wanted to say thank you to all of you for being here today. We're really excited to have Joelle Pitts here. She's going to be talking about collaborative instructional design, leveraging resources to build online learning experiences. So by way of introduction, Joelle Pitts is an instructional design librarian and associate professor at Kansas State University Libraries. She is responsible for the creation of web-based learning objects and environments aimed at improving the information literacy of the university community. She leads the award-winning New Literacies Alliance, an interinstitutional information literacy consortium dedicated to creating institutional, technology, and vendor-agnostic online lessons. Her research interests include distance education, e-learning theory, library user experience, academic collaboration, as well as design and implementation of game-based learning environments. And so we are very, very excited to have Joelle here today. Joelle, thank you so much for agreeing to join us. And at this point, I think we can go ahead and turn over to you.
Great, thank you, Anjali. And thank everyone here who is taking time out of their Friday to come and learn about collaborative instructional design. I'm really very honored and excited to have been asked to speak at this year's DLS Spring Instruction Committee Forum. So I'm looking forward to our hour together. I am going to move through several slides today, and I'm going to try and watch for comments and questions in the chat as they come through, but I will leave some time at the end for questions. And I believe I've got a couple of Instruction Committee folks who are going to be watching for me and will interrupt me if a question comes through that's really pertinent that I should answer quickly. So I'll get started with a little bit of background. Let's see, my slide here. There we go. So like Anjali said, I'm an instructional design librarian at Kansas State University. I work with a large department of liaison librarians who do a lot of face-to-face instruction, but I also help with and design instructional experiences for other departments in my library, such as our Center for the Advancement of Digital Scholarship and our Metadata and Preservation Department, and I've been doing this job for about 6.5 years. Before that, I was the program coordinator for ADDIE, which stands for Agriculture Interactive Distance Education Alliance, and it's an interinstitutional consortium of land-grant universities which collaborate to develop distance education programs in agriculture disciplines. And then, like Anjali said, excuse me, I also lead the New Literacies Alliance, which at its core is an interinstitutional library instruction collaborative. And we're focusing on the development of online framework-based lessons, which are institution, vendor, and technology agnostic. They're all licensed through Creative Commons, so they can be used by anyone, anywhere. And so far, the lessons have been used almost 7,000 times by over 2,700 individual students across the U.S. We have 10 current partner institutions collaborating to design the lessons, and 10 lessons available with more on the way. And like Anjali referred to, in one of my more proudest moments of my career, this project was awarded the 2016 ACRL Instruction Section Innovation Award, and it has been recently featured on the Primo repository as the Site of the Month. And then the lessons are also housed on the ACRL Framework Sandbox. So much of the content that I'm going to present today is directly influenced by the NLA project, by my experiences with collaborative instructional design at my library, and by the collaborative curriculum development that I was involved with through ADDIE. So for this particular group, I didn't think I needed to spend lots of time defining what learning experiences are. But for the sake of clarity today, I will use a very simple definition of learning experience, being any experience designed to induce learning. So in the library world, learning experiences often include LibGuides, tutorials, videos, class sessions, or workshops. But because this webinar is specifically put on by the distance learning section, today I'm going to focus mostly on online or digital learning experiences. And so before we get into the meat of the presentation, what I'd like to do is a quick poll just to get a better understanding of where you all are coming from today, so I can hopefully tailor this a little better. So I'm going to pop up a poll question for about 20 seconds, and then we'll take a brief look at the poll results together. So let me see if I can pop this up. There we go. I'll give you about 20 seconds to enter your response. Okay, we've got responses still kind of trickling in. We'll give it another few seconds and then I'll close the poll here. Okay. So it'll take just a minute for these results to pop up on the screen here. But just looking quickly at the results, it looks like the majority of the participants today have at least some occasional experience collaborating to design learning experiences, and some folks even have quite a bit of experience. And so I'm going to try and sort of shoot the gap between those two groups today, and hopefully present you with some material that will at least help you think in a different way about what you might already be doing. Okay. So I'm going to jump into the topic of the day today by offering some rationale to take part in collaborative design efforts, and to hopefully answer the question of why we should collaborate. So there are some examples in the library world of interinstitutional collaborative design efforts. CLIP was a group of libraries in the Pacific Northwest which created a collection of online tutorials. TILT was a similar effort in the South. ANTS, or the Animated Tutorial Sharing Project, is an international collaborative between librarians in the US and in Canada. And we can also look to examples of collaborative design within library systems or intra-institutional efforts, such as within the California State University library system to develop a common suite of learning objects that all 23 of their campuses could use. ADDIE, Great Plains IDEA, the Nursing Education Exchange, or Nexus, the Big 12 Engineering Alliance, these are all examples of non-library collaborative efforts in higher education, which have come out with various publications and so on that you can read for more information. And we can also look to recent literature in the business world to see how more and more big companies are partnering with other companies in their supply chains to increase efficiencies in producing products or offering services. And so whether you are interested in forming collaborative partnerships to design learning experiences with external or community partners, with other institutional libraries, with branch campus libraries within your system, or even within departments in a single library, the case for collaborative design can, in my opinion, be boiled down into three main elements. And the first is that collaborative design can help you and your institutions maximize your resources. And when I say resources, I mean the staff, time, software, and other inputs that are required to create learning experiences. So I work in Kansas, and we have seen drastic cuts to higher education budgets around the state for the last several years. And we are definitely feeling the pinch here in my library. And not only will we likely not be getting more staff to work on instructional design projects in the near future, but we will continue our existing projects using the software and machines that we bought years ago. We have to collaborate here in order to maximize our dwindling funding and staff lines. But collaborative design also offers an opportunity for a broader perspective. By working with librarians and technologists and other folks from different geographic locations or institutional cultures and patron bases, you can often get a better or a broader understanding of how the topics that you want to teach will affect your students once they graduate and disperse out into the world. And I have found value personally in every collaborative design experience that I've ever participated in, even at the very least, because someone always offers a unique perspective, something new to think about, or some application of a topic that I hadn't thought about before. So one of my favorite quotes that I use all the time when we talk about collaborative design is from Stephen Anderson. In 2013, he said, "Alone, we are smart, but together we are brilliant. We can use the collective wisdom to do great things when we are connected." And I really love that quote to sort of epitomize the why behind why we want to collaborate to do this kind of work. And finally, collaborative design is an attractive option for many librarians because we just love open practices so darn much. Open access, open educational resources, open data, freedom of information. These are all terms that I've heard kind of thrown about the library community with what I like to call deliberate abandon. Open and participatory culture is important to librarians, which makes collaboration to create learning experiences a great fit for what I feel is kind of a natural characteristic of the people who choose this profession. And I think perhaps one of the most obvious reasons that maybe ties all of those three elements that I just talked about together is the opportunity for united labor. So notice that this definition of collaboration on the slide does not say shared labor. In my opinion, designing learning experiences is not really a burden to be taken up by many in order to make the load lighter. It's an opportunity to help our students and our patrons become more active, reflective consumers and creators of information, a goal which I think most, if not all of us, can unite around. You know, why should we recreate the wheel at every institution, so to speak, when we can collaborate to accomplish the same goals, united labor? So let me change the slide here. Oops. There we go. So we've talked about the why, and now I want to talk about the how. So I see collaborative design as a sort of three-legged stool. The three legs include instructional design, project management, and collaboration. And in my case, it's interinstitutional collaboration, but you can substitute the structure of your ideal collaboration for this, the third leg. So you're definitely going to need some kind of instructional design expertise on a project of this kind, whether that's a formal instructional design librarian like me or a group of instruction librarians who have the collected skills of an IED. Instructional design is a process-driven way to create learning experiences, and it offers kind of a frame of reference and a structure for how you can go about any instructional project. But this process-driven nature of instructional design, especially in this kind of environment, is not enough. You've got to couple it with the second leg of the stool, which is project management. Some libraries employ project managers, not many, but some do. Some librarians have developed project management expertise over the years. But however you implement this, it's important to frame your project with some kind of project management structure that will help you to determine the scope and parameters, the resources that you need to accomplish your project, the deliverables and deadlines of your project, and of course the budget for your project. Most instruction librarians that I know don't have a lot of budget experience. They're not often asked to calculate the cost of their time and their projects. But it's important to know how much money is required, both in terms of staff time and technology to accomplish your goals. And especially when you're at a state-funded land-grant institution like I am, you know, and especially one that is suffering from considerable budget cuts, you need to be able to justify the expenses of your project to your stakeholders and your administration. And finally, we've got the collaboration leg of the project. We've already talked about the why in the previous slide, so I'll just reiterate here that if you don't have this leg, you're essentially doing all of that other work on your own. For some business school classes lately that I've done, I've conducted a fairly extensive library literature review and found that a lot of libraries employ some of these aspects in their various projects, although most of them occur kind of organically or informally. Some librarians combine two of these three legs, resulting in some of the overlap that you can kind of see in this graphic here. But very few libraries are combining all three legs in a formal way for library instruction efforts. And so I'm going to refer back to these three legs throughout the presentation as a kind of frame of reference so I don't get too bogged down in the details. All right, so you've decided that you want or need to design learning experiences for your students. This, of course, is the collaboration leg of the stool. And one of the first things that you should do is conduct a self-study. And this is something that can help you examine your own instruction program and existing resources. A self-study can also include a needs analysis of your target audience. It'll allow you to determine what your ultimate instructional goals and later influence your specific learning outcomes. If your self-study reveals that you don't have enough time or resources or staff or expertise to meet your instructional goals in a reasonable time frame, forming a collaboration might be the next logical step for you. You'll want to consider the benefits and potential constraints of collaborating. Some of the benefits include maximized access to expertise and sharing of costs. Some constraints include added complexity and equal or increased time commitment of your staff. The pros and cons will really depend on your institutional factors and your individual situations and settings. If the benefits of collaboration outweigh the constraints, start by researching existing collaborations. There may be systems, state, or regional efforts that are already underway that you could become a part of. Ask your dean or director if any collaborative initiatives that your institution might already be a part of could work for your purposes. If you determine that a collaboration is right for your project and you don't already have collaborators in mind, you can use that self-study to determine the parameters that you can use to search for potential partners. And so when you go to conferences or conduct literature reviews or make contacts within professional associations, those are all great places to start looking for partners. And then finally, once you've found a potential collaborator or two, schedule some time to meet to establish goals, identify roles to be filled, and confirm what your expectations are for the collaboration. Sometimes all of this happens informally. Sometimes it happens more formally with partners signing memorandums of agreement or encumbering time for their librarians to work on the project. For example, within the Great Plains IDEA group, a new partner institution is required to host a campus visit and have high-level administrators sign off on their MOUs before they can participate. And when I would used to go on these campus visits, we'd meet with graduate deans, provosts, CFOs of the university. And one time we even met with Gordon Gee, who's a past president of the Ohio State University, when we did a campus there, a campus visit there, rather. So by contrast, the New Literacies Alliance is definitely not that formal. We have many fewer barriers to participation. But my point being that the level of collaborative formality can vary greatly depending on the goals of your project and how many partners you have and so on. So all of this is time consuming and it takes a lot of mental energy. It also pushes a lot of librarians out of their comfort zones. I think that so often we're encouraged to work towards what makes us happy or work on what we're passionate about. Facebook posts from friends encourage us to follow our bliss or some other saying, you know, accompanied by a beach or a pastoral scene. But as my colleague John Watts likes to say, In order to do the sometimes complex and difficult work of library instruction, especially in an online setting, you can't follow your bliss. And in fact, you have to run away from your bliss because you want your brain to dive deep and really consider the logistics and relationships and technical aspects of the project you're considering. Collaborating is hard work, especially at this early stage, because you don't have much to show for your efforts at this point. So just know in advance that you will not look as happy as the woman in this slide in this phase of the collaborative design experience. It's hard work to get a collaboration in motion. But once you've established your initial partners, gone through all of that initial brainstorming, your initial roles, your expectations, and all of that, you have to decide what and how you're actually going to design your learning experiences. And this is the start of the instructional design leg of the stool and is the one that I'll spend the most time on today. So 3 of the most important things that you can do to kick off a collaborative design effort, especially if you don't know your collaborators very well yet, is to do some initial brainstorming and team building activities in order to get used to each other while you're determining the vision and the processes that you'll use for your project. For the first point here, the NLA group has had a lot of luck in using liberating structures activities to brainstorm and come to consensus about what we want to do in terms of content or design or other big decisions. And if you haven't used these before, liberating structures is a group of team building activities that you can choose from depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And in particular, we like the 1, 2, 4 all activity, which allows kind of everyone to have a say and then to fairly narrow down the options until consensus is reached among the group. So you can use this or other processes to create your shared vision and determine what design processes you will use. For example, how you are going to write your learning outcomes. So we like the Gilchrist-Steele formula, which is kind of modified from what they originally put out there, which is shown here. But you can use any process, really, that gets your group to really dive deep and think about the big picture core concepts that you want to design your content around. And so sometimes these conversations can happen quickly, but in my experience at least, doing the very cognitively taxing work of collaboration building with people you don't know very well takes time, maybe several weeks or even months of phone calls, web conferences, and lots of email. And I don't actually want to get into too much detail about how the logistics of these early conversations occur, because these will vary significantly based on geography, your project, the time that you can spend, and even what time zones everybody lives in that has agreed to collaborate with you. So if you're curious about how our groups have structured these early conversations, I'd be happy to chat more about them in question time or with you personally at another time. Okay. There we go. All right, so project parameters are also something that you'll want to agree on as a group. Things like the structure of the content. Will there be a story arc or a content arc to follow? Will you be using storyboarding perhaps? Consistency between tutorials is another factor to determine, or whether you're going to use a template for all of your content and the creation of a shared style guide. These are all things that you should decide on as a group. Deciding on these parameters early on will ensure that all of your learning experiences have the same basic look and feel, kind of like the image on the slide here. Each individual in this image is different, but each is of a similar size, shape, and placement within the whole, and they are all recognizably apples. And you want the same kind of thing going on for your group of learning experiences that you are collaborating to build. You want them all to have the same kind of look and feel, be relatively the same size, and so on, so that you can package those learning experiences together if you need, or they can stand alone depending on your purpose. A style guide will be much easier to create if your collaboration is say, interdepartmental within the same library, and harder if it consists of libraries in an interinstitutional setting with varying web design standards or branding and those types of things. You can Google examples of style guides. There's a lot of them out there. But some of the major components to think about are the file creation and naming protocols. So where will your files live? What will your naming conventions be? And who will be in charge of file maintenance so that everyone on the project, no matter where they are, will have access to and be able to find relevant documents? How will you brand your project in terms of name and colors or style? And then also accessibility requirements, which will likely need to be built not only around the ADA and Section 508 requirements, but also around individual campus requirements as well, because some campuses have an increased level of standard for accessibility. So what you see here is an excerpt from an older version of an NLA style guide where we listed the colors to be used in each section of the SoftTalk template where we create our lessons. We actually worked with two of our institutional graphic designers to come up with a neutral color palette for the project. And that's because we didn't want anything to be recognizably Wildcat purple or Jayhawk blue so that any institution anywhere could use the lessons kind of out of the box, so to speak. All right. So in addition to determining your structure, the styles, the overall process for the group, you need to choose an instructional design model, which if you're not an instructional designer or have some background in this area, can be kind of confusing and frustrating. Most instructional design models are built around the ADDIE framework for design, and I call it a framework rather than a model, often because the components within ADDIE are somewhat universal in all instructional design models. Analysis, design development, implementation, evaluation, all of these occur somewhere within most of the widely used models. And the basic ADDIE framework has been updated and modified over the years with several different iterations and combinations of the individual components. And my point with all of these different images here is to show you that there are lots of ways to get from point A to point B. And your group just needs to choose which one works best for you. If you or your group are kind of light in the instructional design department or don't have much experience utilizing a formal instructional design model, consider starting out with a linear ADDIE model, completing one phase at a time until you're comfortable with the process, and then kind of going from there. If you do have some instructional design experience on your team and you're already familiar with the basics of instructional design, consider using an accelerated approach like rapid prototyping. Again, the same basic phases of the ADDIE framework are here, but you move faster through them, and the design and development of the content happens in tandem. One of the tenets of this rapid prototyping model is to get a rough prototype up quickly so that you can do some initial user testing right away and use the feedback that you get to make improvements on the second prototype, repeating the process until you're comfortable that what you've got is ready for delivery. The rapid prototyping model also allows a project team to kind of avoid the pitfalls of going through weeks or months of design only to find out at the very end of the design process in the evaluation stage that your students aren't engaging with the content or the assessments don't work. You can avoid some of the very common design team questions and musings around what students will find interesting or respond to, because you're asking the students to react to those various elements during the design process rather than waiting all the way until the end. And one of the reasons that I find rapid prototyping works well in a collaborative environment is because you can use the tests of each prototype to more rapidly determine what works and what doesn't on multiple campuses or multiple departments or however your collaboration is structured. Using a common set of questions and recording the tests using Camtasia or some other kind of recording software is a more efficient way to gather data and report back to the design group. And it kind of speeds up what is otherwise a lengthy process simply due to the nature of collaborative work and the technology that we use to collaborate. And I'm thinking specifically here of web conferencing snafus and online document fails, which I think probably everyone here has experienced at one point or another. So the process you see here is one way to go about testing learning environments in the rapid prototyping process. And for good measure, I've included all of the IRB steps as well that are required if you eventually want to publish or present on the work that you're doing outside of the project team. And we have even gone so far in the NLA project as to create a rolling IRB here at K-State, also including multiple institutions so that we can do testing wherever and whenever we want. So the final leg of the stool is project management. And I have found that this is often an area that librarians struggle with for various reasons. But I think mostly because our culture in higher education environments is often geared to more organic or less formalized processes for teaching and learning. You know, we inherently want to avoid the kind of industrialization of teaching and learning. And so applying a process that has roots in business and industry is often distasteful to us. However, applying even a loose project management plan to a collaborative design process can help keep your project flowing, help your participants to better communicate the deliverables, the timelines, the expectations to their stakeholders and their administrators. Project management, in my opinion, is a perfect accompaniment to instructional design, both within and outside of a collaboration. But it is critical in a collaboration if you want to at least attempt to stay on course with what you've told everyone that you want to accomplish. So one of the first considerations in this stage is obtaining permissions. You need to determine if you need permissions to implement your learning experience and who grants those permissions on each campus, because often it varies. Some projects may not require much. So if you want to just embed a tutorial or a video into a LibGuide, probably you won't need too many permissions to do that. On the other hand, if you're hoping to scaffold your learning experiences into an academic program systematically, say, you might have to go through several rounds of permissions, and that will vary on each campus. So another consideration is timelines and deadlines. It will help the project team to know which deliverables are due when, but these also help to keep the whole project accountable. So typically, at least in my experience, library instruction projects kind of follow the ebb and flow of the academic calendar, but you can determine what works best for your team and for your objectives, whether or not that follows the academic calendar or not. But a project management process can help you stay on track no matter what you choose. You'll also need to determine how you will manage your project records. So where will materials be stored and archived? Who will back them up and how often? Is there a project website or a guide? And who's responsible for maintaining the content? How often will it go under review? These are all questions that you should be asking the project team and determining who's going to handle what and when, which is another reason why project management is important for this kind of collaboration. You'll also need to make a plan for identifying and contacting partners. And when I say partners in this case, it's not your design team partners, it's the people that you're potentially going to be partnering with and collaborating with on each campus. So you need to decide which programs you're going to target. If you're going to work with larger organizations like first year experience programs or honors programs. Another potential partner to think about is the office that administers your learning management system. You know, at some point, if you plan to house your content within an LMS course, you will likely need to make contact with whoever runs this office. And so here at K-State, I'm on a first name basis with our director of our Office of Media Education and have kind of cultivated that relationship over the years to the point where he knows exactly what we're up to, what we need from him, and he works with us to try to implement those goals. So depending on your project and the potential impact of your project, you may end up spending lots of time figuring out these implementation details. But chances are you would have had to do some of this anyway, had you been working on your own. And often the collaborative precedent can kind of grease the skids for the conversations on various partner institutions and can kind of reveal effective avenues or alternative ways of doing things or technical details, other information that you might not have had otherwise if you were trying to go at this as a solo librarian or as a solo institution. And finally, it helps to write all of this down, especially if you're balancing more than one project or one learning environment at a time. And so the chart here represents an early deliverables timeline that the NLA project and was something that we referred to often in the beginning to make sure that we were on track with what we said we were going to do. And so you can kind of see here that we outlined the deliverables, the timelines for each one, and then the team members who would be involved in each one. So part of the project management and implementation process is to have a good understanding of the software that you need to make your project happen. So early on in the project, you should consider conducting a software analysis to determine what software best meets your needs and meets your budget. Come up with a list of specifications based on your shared vision and your design goals, and then do a market scan to see what software might meet those specifications. You'll also want to consider where your content will be hosted and how your students will eventually be using or accessing the materials. Will they be hosted in a course shell, in a LibGuide? Are they videos that can be hosted on a YouTube account and linked or embedded when they're needed? In a collaborative environment, these are questions and considerations that are extra important because you want to ensure that all of your project partners will be able to access and use the content in ways that work and are meaningful on each campus. So, for example, one lesson the NLA project learned very recently is that while we were spending lots of time and energy kind of focusing on implementing the lessons within an LMS or learning management system, a few of our partners either couldn't or had no interest in implementing the lessons in that way. And so we had to sort of expand our viewpoint in order to accommodate them within the process. Accessibility, portability, and usability should be discussed and agreed upon, hopefully prior to implementation or much earlier in the project. And when I use the word portability, I'm talking about the ability of learning experiences to be plugged into or used in a variety of environments, which means you have to choose software and make design decisions with everyone in mind, and perhaps even keep in mind future participants or users of your content. So the graphic here on this slide represents the flow of data for the NLA project, and this was created by one of our instructional designers, Alice Anderson, and I think it does a great job to illustrate how the LTI integration works. And if you're not familiar with LTI, that's Learning Tools Interoperability, which is how the system syncs with an LMS, essentially. So how this integration for the NLA lessons works within an LMS system to sync the assessments of the lesson with the grade book in a course. So the bottom line here being that you may have to come up with additional documents or primers or things like that that help explain what it is that you're doing. Part of the project management and implementation process is to have a good understanding of what you intend to do in terms of launch. Okay, so we've been talking for almost, 40 minutes now about how to form your collaboration, how to decide on the design principles, and how to begin to inject a project management system into your project. And we are just now getting to the point where we're going to talk about deploying our content. And so this process can seem long and arduous up to this point, but it does take a little bit more steam to get through the final rush of implementation, especially if you are planning to release more than one lesson or learning experience at a time. So just when you feel like you're ready to finally release all of your hard work into the wild, you have to stop again and consider just a few more things. So the items that I'm going to cover briefly below are necessary in a collaborative environment, but are also good things to think about if you are attempting a large instructional design project solo as well. So the first thing you want to think about is whether or not you're going to try a soft launch or just go ahead and do a full release. So a soft launch essentially allows you to handpick some of your closest faculty allies on each campus or in each department to test or pilot the lessons in a live class setting before the experiences are made available to everyone. And this will allow you to gather some final data, make revisions, and so on before you do a wider or fuller release. You also want to think about the multiple locations that could be affected by your release. Think about where your material will be released and keep in close touch with everyone who might be affected with technical questions or troubleshooting concerns wherever they happen to be. And this is another place where you want to think about time zones. So if you release your content out into the wild, you know, on Eastern time, your Pacific time zone folks might not be up yet. And so there might be some communication issues there that you need to think about. At least in my experience, there's always a final flurry of revisions and edits before a release, often because the project group hasn't revisited the content in a few days or weeks, and they're looking at it with fresh eyes again. You'll want to have a plan for how you market the project on each campus and perhaps to a wider audience. You know, ask the group if you're going to submit your content to Primo or Cora or the Framework Sandbox. Will you have documentation available for faculty or other librarians who want more information or need some additional convincing? The couple of paragraphs here that you see on the left are the NLA elevator speech, which we have developed to kind of briefly introduce the concept of the project. And this is used on several different places and on different campuses that work with us. Access is another issue that you want to think about before the full release. So how will faculty or librarians get access to and use the content? Will someone have to mediate the exchange each time, or will the process be automated? Who's the point person on each campus in case there is a problem? Technical support is another factor. You'll want to make sure that your IT folks who have been involved in the project so far know when the content will be launched and have set aside a little bit of time to troubleshoot on the fly if needed. And then finally, assessment, or the A word, as one of my colleagues calls it. You will have probably been thinking about, hopefully thinking about student learning as you designed the experience, but you'll also want to have some kind of plan in place to assess the system as a whole as well. Ask yourself, are faculty happy with the results? Is it easy to embed the experiences? What technical issues are causing problems for students or faculty? So I want to talk a little bit more about assessment, since it's a little trickier to do well in an online environment. So I've already mentioned student learning assessment versus system level assessment, and it's worth pointing out here, I think, that these can be done in any number of ways, so long as you are able to use the data to create a compelling enough narrative to garner approval and support from your administrators or your faculty collaborators, and so that you know and your group knows that your students are actually learning something through the content, through their efforts to get through the experience. Format matters when it comes to assessment, and in my opinion, it's much harder to assess student learning in an asynchronous environment than it is in a face-to-face one, not only because you're not there to see them struggling or to see the light bulb moment happen when they do finally get it, but because asynchronous environments aren't as conducive to the types of reflective activities and dispositional assessments that can be done in a classroom environment. But one thing you can do in these environments, these online environments, is a question validity analysis, which is essentially taking all of your pilot or soft launch scores and determining the percentage correct or incorrect for each question. And so one of our experts in this area over in our College of Education says that the research indicates a question with at least 50% correct responses can be considered a valid question. For the NLA project, we typically use a much higher threshold of percentage correct because of the asynchronous nature of the environment and because we don't always get to interact with the class after they take the lessons. A question validity analysis done over multiple campuses or institutions also gives us kind of a greater peace of mind that we've created assessment questions that are universally or more universally valid for students of varying backgrounds and disciplines. And so we also use the data to see which wrong answers are chosen the most often. So we can go back in and revise those questions if needed. So we use this question validity analysis for several windows into the quality of the project. And these processes have been influenced and completed by multiple library staff at multiple institutions. And I really feel like that combined expertise has allowed us to make higher quality learning experiences that have a wider student impact than we ever would have accomplished on our own, on our respective institutions. So we don't have too much time left, so I'll move pretty quickly through these items. But I do want to say that long-term maintenance on a collaborative design project is important because for no other reason than academics move around a lot. Project team members move up, they move to different jobs, or they leave the project altogether. So it's important to have some kind of continuity built into the project to compensate for the inevitable movement of project staff and also of institutional priorities. We've seen institutions get a new dean or a new director or have a new strategic plan, and that affects how much time and effort they can put into collaborative projects that may or may not fit in to those plans any longer. So the first step here is a maintenance plan because content gets old quickly, especially in an online environment. Links change, content relevance grows old, and other aspects of learning environments just need to be updated on a regular basis. And tied with that is a periodic technology review. And this is to ensure that your software, whatever you have chosen, is still working for the group at large. So after system updates and migrations and things like that, is the software that you've chosen, is it still working for everybody? The ever-present quest for funding dollars is something to consider, either to help your project get started or to continue in the long run. Administrative and stakeholder support. So you want to build in support from these individuals early and update them often. These folks often have the kind of 30,000-foot view that can help your project team to make important decisions and plan strategically. And you'll also want to ensure some sort of leadership or succession plan for the project, perhaps by rotating the steering committee or the project leads in some form or fashion. And then finally, capacity. So you want to determine what your project capacity is and then try and maintain at that level. If you know that you can only handle 3 partners and no more, stick to that. If you know that you could use more capacity in a particular area, invite a new partner or send out a call for participation. This is actually pretty tricky. We still struggle with this aspect in the NLA, but it's something that I think is important to at least think about. So I hope that through the last 45 minutes or so, I've provided a basic understanding of the process of collaborative design, and in particular, the intersections of instructional design, project management, and collaboration, which I have found through involvement in all of these large-scale collaborations to be some of the most important things to consider when embarking on a collaborative project, no matter how large or small your group ends up being. And I'd also like to make clear that what I've presented here today is one way to leverage your library staff and resources to improve your instructional quality and impact, but it's by no means the only way. In fact, I'd love to hear about other ways that any of you have attempted this kind of effort at your institutions. So if you'd like to know more about anything that I talked about today, my colleagues Sarah Kearns and Heather Collins and I have a book coming out in July, which covers kind of the art and practice of collaborative design in much more detail, of course using the NLA project as a lens. It's called Sharing and Creating Online Library Instruction, and that'll be available through the ALA bookstore and Neil Schumann. But I'm also really happy to chat with you via email or web conference if you have questions about any of the content that I've presented today, if you're interested in using the NLA lessons, or even if you're just interested in joining the project as a partner, I'd be happy to talk with you. And so I've got my contact information listed up here, and what I'd like to do is use the last 10 minutes here to answer any questions that you have. So thanks very much.
Great, thanks so much, Joelle. Let's see, I was keeping track of questions as they came through chat, and I didn't keep track of folks' names, unfortunately. So we had one question: are your learning experiences platform agnostic?
Yes, so we use SoftChalk Cloud to build all of our tutorials. And SoftChalk, which I mentioned in one of the slides, is LTI compliant, which means that it can be synced with, the lessons can be synced with an LMS, they can be plugged into a LibGuide, into a web page, whatever an institution happens to be using, which is one of the nicer features of using an LTI compliant software. So yes, platform agnostic.
Great. And then, let's see, we had a question. Do you have any resources you'd recommend for librarians who might want to learn more about project management?
Ooh, okay. So I am in business school, and so I've actually read a ton of material about project management lately. There are lots and lots of books out there, like hundreds of project management books. There is one, though, that recently came out about project management in a library setting, and the authors are going to escape me, but I think it's offered through the ALA bookstore, and that would be probably my first recommendation, is to try and find something that offers a project management application in a library setting. And because they're out there, I think there's at least one or two books out there.
Okay, great. That should be pretty helpful. From Kate Herzog, did your institutions use pre-testing before launch to get a baseline on student competencies?
Yes, so not only did we do testing during the design process using the rapid prototyping method, but we also did what we called it a pilot, but it was essentially a soft launch where we kind of cherry-picked several faculty that we work with closely and asked if we could use their classes as a guinea pig class. And then we did the question validity analysis using the score data from those classes to ensure that they were indeed making it through the content and everything was A-okay in terms of a wider launch.
All right. How do you deal with the challenge of different types of institutions? So the person said, I work at an institution that offers certificates in the trades plus degrees, but no graduate degrees. So how might you deal with the challenge of different types of institutions?
Sure. So I have a couple of different perspectives on this. So having worked with the Great Plains IDEA group, those are all land-grant institutions. And there's been, over the years, a few different types of institutions that have wanted to kind of join the fray. However, they really felt like having like institutions was beneficial because they go through the same types of course approval processes and those types of things. But I think for our purposes in libraries, especially when we're talking about basic information literacy instruction, so how to evaluate a resource, how to cite a source, those types of things, it doesn't matter often where a student is or where they happen to matriculate, we still want them to know that information. And so one of the things we've tried to do in NLA is make the content as baseline as possible, kind of the lowest common denominator, and then allow faculty and librarians to either package the lessons together or offer them in combination with some sort of either face-to-face session where they go into more detail on a particular topic, or where they apply what the NLA lessons are talking about to a specific discipline or application, say in a trade school or whatever. And so I think that libraries are in kind of a unique position to maybe transcend some of the institutional type barriers that other academic consortiums have had to deal with.
Great, thanks. We've got one from Nancy Gibson. She says she's looking forward to the book, and what has been the hardest lesson for you guys?
The hardest lesson. So one of the things that has been really helpful for our project and also very challenging for our project is the advent of the ACRL framework. So we started this whole the whole collaborative around the idea of meta-literacy. So we wanted to get away from some of the click here, click there type of content and get more towards that being literate in any environment type of concept. And so when the framework came out, we were like, yes, this is exactly what we want to do. However, getting librarians at our various institutions to engage with the framework, becoming familiar with some of the aspects of how to engage with that particular document has been challenging. And also teaching new things. So one example is scholarship is conversation. So a lot of our librarians at our partner institutions have been doing kind of kitchen sink one-shot sessions for a long time, and they don't get to talk about scholarly conversations or authority and some of these bigger concepts that are addressed in the framework. And so a lot of us had to kind of learn how to teach those things before we could create a lesson that succinctly covers that material. So that was also challenging and cognitively difficult, but it was really fascinating work, and we're kind of struggling with some of that now even still with some of the topics that we're working on.
Great. Deb Baker had mentioned or said, you know, where can I find the 10 frames based lessons available through the Creative Commons? But I think perhaps Kristen Conlon has dropped the link. Do you see that in the chat? Is that where?
Yes.
Those are them. Yep. Okay. So
exactly.
that question took care of itself. Thanks attendees. Does anyone else have any other questions for Joelle? Oh, here's one. Rebecca Greer says, what's your perspective on the Credo InfoLit tutorials and how this resource monetizes for libraries learning experiences for our students?
So I don't want to pick on any vendor, Credo included. We did do kind of an analysis of the Credo tutorials before we embarked on the NLA project, and kind of what our determination was is that there were, for the price, there was not enough customization or communication that could happen between the Credo instructional designers and ourselves. And so rather than paying the additional money for the tutorials, we decided, since we're going to invest all of the staff time anyway, why don't we collaborate with other libraries so that we can all benefit from that, that interaction and that content, if that makes sense.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much. Attendees, we will be sending out a survey to get your feedback on things. We have maybe one more minute if anyone else has another question, but I'll give a second in the chat here.
I got a private question, and I do want to address that one. So this goes back to the trade organizations or trade schools. So we use the term scholar in a lot of our content, but I do want to say that when you build tutorials that are Creative Commons licensed, often an institution could come in and change that language. They could change the terminology to appeal to whatever disciplines or trade groups or whoever they're working with, which is kind of the beauty of the Creative Commons licensing, is you can modify it to work for you, essentially. So I just wanted to kind of address that one that came into.
Okay, a couple more in our last minute. How did you choose Soft Chalk, and are there other platforms for creating tutorials that appeal for you? And are you considering developing a news literacy tutorial?
Okay, so I'll address the last one first. Yes, we're working on what our shorthand for it is right now is fake news, but of course we know that term is not ideal. So we're working on kind of an evaluating web information tutorial right now. So that's a yes. We chose Soft Chalk because after 2 market scans, it is still the software that meets most of our stipulations in terms of functionality, LTI compliance, and accessibility factors. There are alternatives out there, and they run the range from cheap, like SoftTalk is, all the way up to thousands and thousands of dollars per year in subscription fees. Elucidat is one that I would love to be able to afford, but we just won't be able to afford it right now. Adapt Learn is another one that's open source and that we're considering for future iterations of the project. So yes, they're out there. You just have to match the factors that you really want to focus on with the cost and with the features that are available in each product.
All right, thank you so much, and thank you to all of our attendees. I think we are going to call this session done. Thank you all.
Thanks, Natalie and Anjali.
Yep. Yeah, no problem. Great work.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joelle.
I'm gonna, Lois, I think we can go ahead.